Hello and welcome to the Petersfield Bookshop Recommends. This is our series of short videos in which we take a look at a particular genre or type of writing, or perhaps a subject or even a single author, and provide some recommendations. We think you're all pretty smart out there and able to find the bestsellers and the big name authors for yourself, so we will try and send you down some slightly less well-trodden byways in the company of writers not so well known. This video takes a look at the so-called new nature writing. Landscape and nature writing is going through an incredible revival at the moment, and whether there is anything actually new about it is presumably up for discussion still, but it makes for a useful phrase to define a genre which certainly feels fresh and full of energy at the moment. So this is our first book, and as you can see, I have, with our very first book, moved the goalposts, because this was in fact originally published in 1967, and the edition in front of you there on the screen is the 50th anniversary edition. It's The Peregrine by J.A. Baker. It's a peculiar and slightly eerie book, but it has been championed as a lost gem by many of the people writing today within the new nature writing movement. So that's where we start. Also, we start here because it's B, and this is a list in alphabetical order. So The Peregrine begins with a chapter on the natural history and general observations about the peregrine as a hawk. I have to say that there are many writers today and many naturalists and ornithologists who would disagree with many of the observations that J.A. Baker makes. Be that as it may, it is a short chapter at the beginning of the book, and the bulk of the book then becomes a diary, and it becomes a diary from October to April of watching the peregrines flying over the fenland, the flat, wet fenland on the east of Britain. And it's not the kind of diary where there's a narrative drive behind it. It's not the kind of diary where you think, oh, well, we're looking forward to this or that happening tomorrow or in the next week or in the next month. It is intensely repetitive. He goes out every single day and does exactly the same thing and describes it in extraordinary detail. So every day he sets out onto the fens, he tries to track down some kill or other that's been made by the peregrines, and he will describe that in very vivid and very gory detail at times. He'll describe the weather, the environment, what he sees, and then he moves on to try and track down the peregrines themselves, the pair of peregrines that he's watching, and he will observe them for a while, and that is his day, all day, every day. It is a quite remarkable epic, really, that lasts over these winter months. And although this word is overused, there is an element of the shamanic about it, because it's quite clear that at times he identifies with his prey, in inverted commas, these two peregrines, to quite an incredible degree. So it is a bleak book. It is an unusual book. It would probably, although it won awards in its day, it would probably have a hard time finding a publisher today, I would have thought, because it is so unusual. However, the writing is beautiful, and it has a certain numinous quality, a certain spirituality to it. In fact, some of the writing would not be out of place in a Ted Hughes poem. This is a very short paragraph in which he describes the very end of watching a peregrine hunting. And for the hawk, resting now on the soft, flaccid bulk of his prey, there was the rip and tear of choking feathers, and hot blood dripping from the hook of the beak, and rage dying slowly to a small, hard core within. So that's The Peregrine by J.A. Baker. So our second book is Ness by Robert Macfarlane. Now, you can't move in the nature writing section of a bookshop these days without coming across Robert Macfarlane. He's one of the names that has dominated the genre for possibly the past 20 years or so. But this is, we promised you lesser known byways. This is one of his lesser known books. It is short. It is just over 80 pages long. It is difficult to categorize, but probably best described as a prose poem. Some of it in prose, some of it in poetry. Some of those 80 pages are full page pencil illustrations by Stanley Donwood, which enhance the text enormously, it has to be said. So the ness in question is Orford Ness. Orford Ness is a shingle spit on the eastern coast of Britain. It is a national nature reserve. It is a place you can only access with special considerations. You have to get a boat across and so on. And it also used to be the home to our 1950s nuclear testing program, where we built bomb cases and things like that. So there were a lot of abandoned military research buildings on this spit. It is therefore quite an eerie place, and Robert Macfarlane tells a story of a ritual taking place in a building called the Green Chapel. Of course, the Green Chapel features heavily in the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and this is always in the background of this book, Ness. This is a mythic story that he's telling, and that's probably one of the reasons why he calls the book Ness rather than the more specific Orford Ness. This ritual in the Green Chapel is clearly one of malevolent intent. It's conducted by people who have names like the physicist or the ornithologist, the bryologist, the armourer. And so there is a sense that if this ritual comes to its conclusion, something apocalyptic will be set in train. But at the same time, 5 creatures are making their way towards the Ness with a sense that maybe if they get there, they'll be able to stop this. Those creatures are just called as, it, he, she, and they. However, although those names are somewhat prosaic, they are in fact purely elemental spirits, really. They are monsters, and each in their different way is making its way towards the spit. There is also a character called Drift, all of these with capital letters, and that is the spirit of oceanic movement, sort of a swirling, immensely powerful character, and that is depicted as something which has lasted through all time and continues to the end. So there are these incredible creatures and characters in this book. It never loses sight of the specificity of the Ness itself, of the place about which it's being written, but it is an incredibly engrossing and thought-provoking read, if quite a short one. So book number 3 is Gossip from the Forest by Sarah Maitland. This book was originally published in 2013. I'm a little gutted I didn't find it before, because I have literally just finished reading it, and it's probably my favourite book this year so far. It is a book which talks about the connections between forests and fairy tales, and Maitland has a thesis that Northern European fairy tales in particular, and the Brothers Grimm is where she largely goes for those, are very place specific, that they are a kind of they grow out of the forests. They grow out of the forests of Northern Europe. And she makes quite a good case throughout the book, but what she does better than that is to walk in forests. Every chapter is a walk in a forest. Some of them are coniferous plantations in the Scottish Highlands, and some are beech forests in the south of England. But wherever they are, she goes. Sometimes she goes alone. Sometimes she goes with a companion who might be her son or another researcher into landscape, or a well-chosen companion, and she takes a walk. That's every chapter, and then at the end of every chapter there are 3 or 4 pages in which she retells one of Grimm's fairy tales. Sometimes those retellings are quite close to the originals and just bring out some of the themes that she's been talking about in her walk through the forest in that chapter. Sometimes they are completely rewritten from a different angle and a different voice. Sometimes the bad guy becomes the good guy. And much as I am kind of over people rewriting fairy tales, she does it so well. It really is worthwhile. So it's a brilliant book, and among all its other virtues, the one which stands out for me is that it actually taught me things I didn't know. The facts in it are good. A lot of new nature writing, because it has a kind of autobiographical or personal or journaling kind of bent to it, can be a little light on the facts and the actual natural history, but Maitland manages to get that in there, and so I read every chapter thinking, you know what, I did not know that. It's a brilliant book and well worth a read. Book number 4 is A Line in the World by Daughter Noors. I I think that's how you pronounce it. My apologies if I've got that wrong. This is a very recent book. In fact, the copy I've read is still in hardback at the time of recording this. The line in the world in question is the North Sea coast of Denmark. So that is the eastern coast of Denmark. It is a coast which is constantly on the move. It is sand dunes and beaches and promontories and inlets. It is constantly subject to storms and flooding. And all of this is her subject, really. She grew up in a place on that coast, and she spends a year in the writing of this book, traveling up and down that coast, visiting significant places. This is kind of the modus operandi of a lot of new nature writing, that there will be, the author will go on a journey and relate that journey whilst making the points that they want to make. However, what makes this book stand out in particular is the language, and I have a hunch that it is possibly something to do with the fact that this is originally written in Danish, and that some of the cadence and style and crispness of Danish, I think, has come through into the English translation, because it reads very differently. It took me actually the first chapter before I could get into a flow with the reading, but it was well worth doing. There are incredible stories here. There is an incredible sense of the place that is being described, and you come away from the book feeling a little bit like you have just been standing in one of those North Sea storms that she describes so well for the past few days, and a little bit windblown. So if one way of writing your new nature writing blockbuster is to go on a journey and to relate that journey to your readership whilst making insightful points, another way, which has become so popular that it's basically a subgenre, is the nature as therapy or nature as healer book. The most obvious examples of this are the Raina Wynne books. She wrote The Salt Path, followed by The Wild Silence, and currently, as I speak now, out is a new book called Landlines, and they're very beautiful and very wonderful books in many ways. Essentially, she went on long distance walks with her husband, and her husband had just recently been diagnosed with a rather terrible disease, and they had also found themselves homeless at the same time. So she is probably the one that people think of in this genre, but our fifth book is our representative for the nature as healer or nature as therapy subgenre. Out of the Woods by Luke Turner. It was published in 2020, and because of that, it probably didn't quite get the big up that it may have had there not been a global pandemic happening at the same time. Out of the Woods, it starts with the narrative drive is provided by the breakup of a very significant relationship, and that throws our author back onto things that he thought were resolved largely. He finds himself in the midst of depression, which is something that he has battled with before. He finds the guilt surrounding his identity as a bisexual man rearing its head again. There are issues of sexual abuse in the background, as well as a religious upbringing, which has left him in the adult world with all kinds of confusion about himself, his body, and his sexuality. So he goes into the woods. The woods in this question are Epping Forest, by and large. And what's nice about this book is it is not simplistic. It is not simply I went into the woods and finally I could breathe and everything was better and I came out again a healed and restored person. Sometimes his trips into the woods actually make things worse. Sometimes they are dark and traumatic. But through the book, as he explores all of those themes and explores the forest, there is some form of resolution. And without spoiling it, there is some form of resolution towards the end, but it's not a simple and straightforward story, and that is what makes this one stand out, and the one that I have put in to represent that whole subgenre, really. So that's the end of our very first of the Petersfield Bookshop Recommends videos. There will be more of those appearing soon. Please, if you've enjoyed it, come back and check out what appears here on YouTube. If you like what we do, you can also check us out on our website, which is simply www.petersfieldbookshop.com, or indeed check us out on Twitter and say hello, where we are very active. For now, thank you and goodbye.